Morning, everybody. Welcome to Western Hills. As always, it is so great to be with you guys. It's good to be back. I went out of town for the 4th of July. I got to visit some college friends in New Braunfels, and we went out on the lake and got out in the pool. It was a really great time. So I hope you got to have a hot dog and watch some fireworks, but it's good to be back with you guys. The other exciting thing today is after 2 weeks of camp, our youth students are like fully back now, and you guys are missed whenever you're not here. So it's good to have you guys back here today with us. Today we're going to be continuing our Interrupted series, which we've been in this entire summer. And what we've been doing in this series, we've been in the Gospel of Mark. And we've been looking at Jesus' life, specifically at times in Jesus' ministry where he gets interrupted. And we've been taking those interruptions and kind of holding them under a microscope and saying, okay, how does Jesus respond to that interruption? What can we learn and discern based on how Jesus respond? So it's been a lot of fun. This is week 7, so we're already halfway done, which is crazy, or over halfway done. We'll be over halfway done after this sermon, but it's been a lot of fun. And every time I'm up here, I feel like I get more and more comfortable and love it even more. So, and that has a great deal to do with you guys' encouragement and all of that. I don't know if you've noticed, if you've been to Walmart recently, which I'm sure you have, but something that they're pushing very hard as of late, and by as of late, I mean really since COVID, is the online Walmart grocery order thing, where you get on the app and you select what you want, and you have to do it a day or so in advance, and then you basically tell them the pickup time you want, you roll in, and they bring your groceries out to you. There's people inside shopping for you. It's put people like me at a disadvantage. I'm not well prepared enough as a college student to use that. My shopping experience usually looks like, well, I wanted a sandwich for dinner, and now I'm out of bread, so I have to go to Walmart right now. I usually don't have the ability, like my mom does, to plan that far out ahead. I'm a traditionalist. I like to go into the store. But an interesting unintended consequence of this new thing that they're pushing, they now have tons and tons of employees in the store. Specifically, when you go to the grocery section, it feels like every aisle there's somebody shopping for the Walmart grocery order, which feels like it should be great because I feel like used to, it was really difficult to find anybody to help you. But my experience has been as there's more and more employees in the store, it hasn't really been that much easier to get any help. Because even though they're there, they're not necessarily there to help you find your stuff. They're there to shop for whoever is waiting outside for their groceries. And of course, if you ask them for their help, they will help you. They always do it a little bit begrudgingly, which I totally understand. They've been given instructions to do this thing. But it's just interesting because I feel like when you go into Walmart now, you're surrounded by employees, but none of them really see you, right? They're focused on what they're doing. You don't feel very seen any more than you did when there was not nearly as many employees. And so as silly as an example as that is, this is something we experience a lot, this feeling of not really being seen by the people around us. I think we can all relate to the feeling of walking into a room and it's just a ton of people and it feels like the room starts to grow and you kind of start to shrink and that anxiety kind of builds up. But then you make eye contact with your friend across the room and you feel seen and it kind of all melts away and you feel comfortable. But that doesn't always happen, right? You don't always get that relief from what is a pretty scary feeling. I remember whenever I first moved into Abilene Christian as a freshman, one thing the ACU does, which is actually a really cool thing, it's called Wildcat Week. What Wildcat Week is it's basically like summer camp the week before classes start for incoming freshmen, just to give you a chance to get to know campus, get to know each other. And when I went to ACU, I didn't know anybody showing up. I didn't really have any friends there that I knew of. I've made a lot of friends since, but you have to go when you first get there to this massive ballroom and check in for Wildcat Week, where they give you your name tag and all these other things. So I go to this ballroom, and of course it's full of people. The line is snaking back and forth throughout the whole room, and it seems like everybody else in the room knows somebody except for me. And I'm in there, and I'm kind of making eye contact with people, but their eyes quickly dart away back to their conversation. And it truly was a horrific feeling because I'm just standing there. There's a group in front of me, and they're all talking to each other. There's a group behind me. They're all talking to each other. This feels awkward. This feels awkward. I don't know how to stand. And I'm just dying, hoping that one of them, either in front or behind me, will see me and just ask me my name, right, and get to know me. And this was especially frustrating because I thought that was something only kids deal with. You know what I mean? Like, I'd experienced that in middle in high school, but I was under the impression that once you became an adult, you received all the confidence in the world and you no longer had that problem. But here I was doing my first adult thing of going to college, and I feel really small. I'm surrounded by people, but I don't feel seen by any of them. And it's a really upsetting feeling. It's something we all deal with in some spaces that we're a part of. Maybe my hope is that it's not many, but we all have at least a space or two in our life that we walk in and we're surrounded by people, but we don't feel seen by any of them. And maybe the church is even that place for you. And so if that's the case for you with any of that, if you know that feeling, then I think this passage will be especially helpful for you. In fact, it's a passage that I'm incredibly excited about. It's one of my favorite stories from the Bible. So we're going to be in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 34. And as always, the verses will be on the screen, but I'll be reading it up here. But feel free to follow along however you'd like. Starting in verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Okay, this is now week 4 in a row where Jesus and his disciples have been in a boat. So apologies if it's all starting to run together. I guess they just really enjoyed being in a boat together. So I know it's making things a little confusing. But continuing in verse 22, then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. And so this is whenever Mark introduces us to Jairus. And Jairus is an interesting character because Jairus is a synagogue leader, right? And Jesus has already, up to this point in Mark, had some run-ins with the Jewish authority and with the synagogue leader and with the Pharisees. And I imagine that word had traveled around and not painted Jesus in a very good light. But here is Jairus. Jairus is desperate. And I think what's beautiful is Jairus expresses a belief that Jesus can actually help him. He says, if you lay hands on my daughter, she will be healed and live. And so as is the theme with this series, Jesus is interrupted. He's interrupted by a man who has a need. His daughter is dying. He brings that need before Jesus. And as we've seen with Jesus, as is consistent with Jesus' character, what does Jesus do? He responds to that need. He responds to this interruption. When the interruption involves a person who needs help, Jesus makes time for it. And that's exactly what he does in this passage. But this is not the interruption that I want to focus on today. So if we continue reading, a large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. I don't know if you've ever been to a Texas or a Texas A&M football game, whichever is your favorite. But when those games end, you don't even have to know where the exit is. The crowd just kind of naturally pushes you out that way. In fact, you might want to go somewhere else, but you're probably going to be out of luck because you can just feel the entire crowd pressing around you, pushing you towards the exit. That's, I feel like, what is almost happening to Jesus and his disciples here. People are pressing them so hard that they don't even hardly have to move. They're just being pushed where they're going. And we're introduced to this woman, this unnamed woman, in comparison to Jairus, who's given a name. And we're told that this woman has been subject to bleeding for 12 years. For 12 years, she has been suffering under chronic pain. She spent money on every doctor and cure out there, and yet all that's happened is now she has no more money, and she's only gotten worse. But after all she's been through, she thinks to herself, if I can just touch Jesus, not even Jesus, if I can just touch Jesus' cloak, then I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. And so just like that, 12 years of suffering goes away. Mark tells us that immediately she could tell that she was freed from her suffering. And you'd think that that's all that needs to happen, right? This woman has done an incredible thing. She's expressed the right faith. She's done the right thing, and a good thing has happened to her. She should be good to go on her merry way. Jesus is on his way to attend to somebody who is actively dying, right? This should be the last we hear about this woman, but if we continue, we read this. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" And so Jesus stops. In spite of the urgent nature of the situation that he's dealing with, in spite of the fact that there's a life on the line, Jesus stops. "Who touched me?" he says. So why does Jesus stop? I've always found this so interesting. Like I said, he's on his way to deal with something so important. Why does he need to know so badly who touched him and received healing? If we read the rest of the passage, it says, "But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering.'" And so Jesus, he's looking around, and for this woman, the jig is up, right? Because this isn't what she had planned. She was hoping to be able to slip in and slip out completely unnoticed. That's what she was used to. But once she gets called out, she falls at Jesus' feet, and she almost confesses what she's done as if she's done something wrong. But then Jesus looks at her, and he says something to her, and I like to think that he says what he says with a soft smile on his face. He says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." That's why Jesus stops. He doesn't stop because he had to. He did not need to stop at this moment. The woman was already healed. She'd already been freed from his suffering. But he stops because when you're this woman and you've been suffering, specifically with what she's been suffering for as long as she has, it has a way of isolating you from the people around you. Suffering from bleeding for 12 years straight as a woman in the first century would have been an incredibly isolating thing. And so I have to think that because of what this woman had gone through, for as long as she'd been going through it, she had probably become the type of person who just gotten used to being unseen by the people around her. And I know this because she's actually counting on remaining unseen in this story. She's counting on being able to slip through a crowd of people, touch Jesus' cloak, and get out. Sure, being seen by people, but not actually being seen by them. That is what she has become used to. And so what does Jesus do for this woman who demands no attention and who is actually hoping to use the fact that she doesn't draw much attention to her advantage? Jesus creates an interruption. That's the interruption that I want to focus on today, because up to this point, all the interruptions we've dealt with have been ones where someone brings a need before Jesus. They ask for Jesus' attention, to attend to healing, to attend to teaching, to drive out a demon. And Jesus has found these interruptions to be very important. He's consistently made time for them when someone has brought a need before him. In fact, that's exactly what he's doing when he acknowledges the woman in the story. But what's interesting about this story is that Jairus was bold enough to bring his need before Jesus. Because Jairus was a synagogue leader. Once a week, the entire community gathered around, and they all saw him as he taught the scriptures. He was used to being seen by many in his community. And there's nothing wrong with that. Jairus is not a bad person for being the kind of person who's commonly seen by the people around him. But it gives Jairus an advantage over this woman. This woman doesn't have the same boldness. She seems to think that she's not important enough to bring her need before Jesus. And so this moment requires Jesus to create an interruption for this woman. And that's exactly what he does. And so in doing so, Jesus sends a message to this woman and anyone who happens to be watching. He says, "I see you. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." But underneath that line is another one. "Daughter, you who have gotten so used to not being seen by those around you that you thought you weren't important enough to bother me with your need, I see you. And when you consider especially what Jesus does here in the backdrop of what's at stake, the fact that there's a life at stake in the background, it further strengthens the message that Jesus is sending. He's certainly not saying that acknowledging this woman is more important than helping Jairus' daughter. In fact, after service, read on a few more verses and see what Jesus does for Jairus' daughter. But the message that Jesus sends is that I am going to take time to see the unseen no matter the cost. Jesus goes out of his way to see the unseen. And Jesus sees you. I want you to think of the impact of what Jesus does here for this woman. She doesn't have that person in the spaces where we feel comfortable, where at first we feel a little overwhelmed, but then we make eye contact with that person. It's like, okay, we're good. I'm safe. I'm seen here. She doesn't have that, right? So Jesus creates an interruption, and he becomes that person for this woman. You can just feel the warmth and the love and the understanding in Jesus' words to this woman. Jesus goes out of his way to see the unseen. This is so important because there are people in our lives, and maybe people in this room, who for whatever reason, whether it's a lack of connections, some sort of sin struggle they deal with that causes them to be isolated from others, some sort of affliction, or just a feeling of unfamiliarity, it causes them to feel this way consistently. They consistently find themselves feeling unseen by the people around them. They walk into a crowded room and they don't feel the relief that comes from being seen by the people around you. And they don't want to bother or burden anybody. They're waiting for someone to be that person who looks at them and says, I see you. And so when they go places and they enter a room, they expect to just be unseen by the people around them. And this happens, as some of us know all too well, even at church. The number one complaint, my dad's an elder, so I would hear about some of this stuff. The number one complaint our church would receive from people who had visited our church and then decided not to keep going was something along these lines. Well, I showed up and I sat down at worship. In fact, we showed up early and then we sat there. Once worship ended, we hung around for a while. And then we went to Bible class and we hung around for a while there, and not one person noticed us or made us feel seen. They were sitting there the whole time hoping that somebody would go out of their way to make them feel seen, and it didn't happen. And so it goes without saying that this is not okay, especially if it's happening in the church. And so what I first want to say is this. If what I just described is you, if you're listening to this right now and you find the church to be a place where you don't feel seen and you don't feel comfortable, and that feeling of being unseen most definitely extends into the church, what I want to say to you is that Jesus sees you. Jesus sees you. That fact is very clear to me in this story. And the other thing that I want you to know from my heart is that we don't always get it right. And if the church has failed you, for lack of a better term, in that regard, and if the church has consistently been a place where you don't feel seen, I want to ask you to give us one more chance. Give us the chance to make this a place where you feel seen. Give us a chance to make this the place where if you don't feel seen anywhere else in the world, you feel seen in this building. So when you walk in this building, when you walk through those doors, it's not one person who makes you feel seen, but it's 10, 20, or 30 people. I want you to give us another chance to make this a place where you feel seen. But the second thing that I want to say is this. If what I just described is not you, and most of the spaces that you occupy in your life, you walk in and you feel relatively comfortable, it doesn't take you too long to find somebody who makes you feel seen at work and at church, at school, whatever it is. And I want to offer this as a reminder. All of us in this building who feel seen are here because somebody at some point saw us. And so maybe that was a month ago. One of your friends invited you to church and you've been coming for the past several weeks and they've been introducing you to people so that this is a place where you feel seen. Or maybe back when you were a teenager, you didn't have a church family and one of your good friends growing up said, hey, come to church with me. And they made church a place from that point on where you feel seen and you've never looked back. Or maybe you're like me and the person who made you feel seen was your parents from birth. And from birth, your parents have ensured that church is a place where you feel seen by the people around you, and you don't even know what it feels like to walk into the church building and not feel seen. If that's you, regardless of your story, if you feel seen in this place, it's because someone along the way made you feel seen. Someone along the way did for you what Jesus does for the woman in this story. We who feel seen have a responsibility to go out of our way to see the unseen. My hope is that I've been talking about this, that a name and a face is coming to your mind, because people who consistently feel unseen are already in your lives. I hope that an image is being burned into your brain, and a face and a name is on your heart. Maybe it's someone where you work. Maybe it's someone at school. Maybe it's someone that you always pass at the grocery store or the gym. Maybe it's somebody in this building right now. But my challenge to us is to make an interruption for that person. Do for them what Jesus did for the woman in this story. As people seen by Jesus, see the unseen. Now, the key to this is that you can't wait for the opportunity to come to you, because Jesus could have easily let this moment pass. He could have easily just kept walking, knowing that the woman's suffering, that she had been freed from her suffering, and that she had been healed. But that's not what Jesus did. He stopped, and he wasn't going to move another foot until he saw that woman and until he made him feel seen. And that's exactly what he did. He stopped and he looked that woman in the eyes and he said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." And so that's the key about people who typically go unseen. Much like the woman in this story, they're not going to ask you to create an interruption for them. This is going to have to be a choice that you make this week. You're going to have to choose to go out of your way to make somebody feel seen. But if Jesus could afford to create that interruption and could afford to create time to make this one feel seen when somebody's life was at stake, then I know for a fact that we can find the time to do the same in our week. And this doesn't have to be anything big. This looks like the next time you pass that coworker who you know doesn't feel as connected or as seen as the other people in the office do. The next time you pass them and you're tempted to say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Next time, stop and start a conversation with them. And when that conversation ends, invite them over to your house for dinner. There's not a much better way to make somebody feel seen, to explicitly make it clear to someone, "I see you," than inviting them into your home and serving them a meal. One of the couples who was just here last week to come watch me preach, family friends who mean the world to me, he is a professor at Abilene Christian where I go to school. And since me and my housemates have been freshmen, they have been inviting us into their home every 2 weeks without fail, or at once every 2 weeks without fail, and they serve us a meal. Nothing crazy happens. We just share a meal together, look at some scripture together, but then we just talk about how our lives are and how we're doing. And it's a nice break because at college, that feeling I experienced at the beginning, though it's gotten better, we all still experience, and we almost have to fight to feel seen on our college campus, but never when we're in Kenneth and Amy's home. They make it clear with their words and their actions, "We see you guys." And it's had an unmeasurable impact on me and my housemates. Or for the kids in the room, I know you probably don't want to think about school yet, but whenever you do go back to school, you're probably already thinking right now of that person who you know doesn't have a good friend group and who you know consistently finds himself alone. The next time you see that person, invite them to join you for lunch, or at the least, make yourself available to them in a way. Become a friendly face for them. Become the type of person that when they pass, you're always going to be a warm, friendly person for them. Or maybe the next time you're at the grocery store and you pass that same mom who you pass every single time, who's always struggling to corral her kids. The next time you just want to pass by her. The next time you see that person at the gym who comes in and out as quickly as they can and kind of avoids eye contact with the people in there. The next time you just pass them like you always do, stop and say, "Hey, I see you in here every time. My name's Grant." And then the next time you see them, remember their name once they tell you who they are and learn more about them. Become their friend. Just make it clear to that person with your words and with your actions that you see them. You have no idea the impact that can have on a person. And certainly, if you see someone in this building right now who you know probably feels unseen, do whatever you can to make them feel seen today. This is nothing overly complicated. It's simply saying to a person with our words and with our actions, I see you. It's creating an interruption in your life for that person. And so I want you to be thinking of that person. I want that person to be on your heart. I don't want you to leave this place without a plan for how you are going to create an interruption for that person who's on your heart and on your mind. And I know that me asking you to create more interruptions in your life is probably not what you want to hear. I'm sure there's going to be a moment, maybe tomorrow, whenever you are with your coworker and you've just gotten an email that you have a meeting that afternoon, so you're already feeling interrupted, and they're like, what'd you talk about at church this week? And you're going to be like, well, the guy who preached said we have to create more interruptions for our life. I know it's not convenient, but that's the whole point. People who consistently find themselves unseen, it's never convenient to make them feel seen. That's why they feel unseen. That's why the woman in the story didn't feel worthy to bother Jesus with her problem. So this week, you're going to have an opportunity to create an interruption for someone and to make them feel seen. I want you to see their face. I want you to be praying over that opportunity. And if you don't hear anything else today, hear this. Jesus goes out of his way to see the unseen. Jesus sees you, and because of that, we have an opportunity to make others feel seen. I want us to leave this place with the boldness to create an interruption for someone in our life, the boldness to make somebody feel seen this week. I'm going to pray for us, but I'm going to specifically pray for that boldness, that we would have the boldness to do what Jesus does for the woman in the story, for someone in our life, to create an interruption and make somebody feel seen. Please join me. Let's pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this opportunity for us to come together, God. It's always a blessing to be together in an assembly and to worship you and to hear from your word. God, I thank you so much for Jesus' example. I thank you for even subtle examples like this where he takes time to see the unseen. God, I pray that you would impress upon our hearts the face and the name of somebody in our lives who we know is unseen. I pray that when we're at the point in this week where we've kind of pushed that to the side and worried about other things, I pray that you bring it abruptly to the forefront on our lives so that we can't avoid it, so that we have no choice but to make them feel seen this week, God. I thank you for the gift of your Son and the fact that he sees us. Thank you for everything you do for us. It's in your Son's name I pray. Amen.